Welcome to Lectures by Lob-EZ. As you can tell, I am not Dr. Lob-EZ. I'm his cousin, Donaldo Tello. I visiting from Italy once again. Since Dr. Lob-EZ has been called to Delaware to help President Biden. Seems the president has lost some top secret documents, and so Dr. Lob-EZ volunteered his time to help, President Biden find those missing documents. So I hope you don't mind. Today we talk about the French Revolution, specifically the causes, okay? So for the next 20 or so minutes, I will be talking to you about that. But first, before we go any further, I must ask for the good doctor that you hit the like and subscribe button. Dr. Lob-EZ, he much too modest to tell you this, but he has a dream. He think he is like that Indiana Jones, that guy on the movies. He want to buy one of these very fancy motorbikes, that got the sidecar. He has Dr. Lob-EZ has a lady friend, and he wants to be able to, tool her around town and, have opportunity to drive in the nice weather. He say if he gets enough money, he will give his students ride around the parking lot at the school too. So he has to get monetized for this to happen. So with your help, maybe he can do that. Okay. So the first cause that we want to talk about today is the American Revolution. Hopefully, you being American students have some background with this event, but one thing that he mentioned here in the notes talk about how the term revolution sometimes not so consistent with what some historians think is a true revolution. Some historians instead call it a war of independence. But it don't matter which you believe it to be, because it both are kind of right. But during this conflict, let's just call it that, one thing for sure that happened is the those men who pushed for the revolution, sometimes they are called the founding fathers. They gave birth to something called liberalism, okay? And I think later on in the course you spend more time talking about that, but it's not what the modern liberalism is today. Like if you talk about politics and conservatism and liberalism, it don't quite mean that. Liberalism is this idea that rights are given or granted to people when they are born from their creator, and that those rights cannot be violated. And this concept was indeed very radical. Okay, all right, let's move on. So let's kind of talk about why these colonists become so unhappy that they declare their independence. It starts when after the British defeat The French in the Seven Years' War, or in the American theater, it was called the French and American War. Um, you know, the French relied quite a bit because their numbers were few in the Americas, so they relied quite a bit on Native Americans to help them fight. And so the British did not want, after this war was completed, they did not want the colonists to go rushing into the land that they had gained from the French, because this would further inflame the natives and cause them to fight back against the incursion into their land by the American colonists. So they say, no, you can't do that. And this is called the Proclamation of 1763. This map here show you, and this anger the American colonists, because their population is growing and they're farmers, and so they want to get at all of this rich farmland on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, so they're not too happy. So, in addition to that, British, are going to station a large army in the Americas, and also force the American colonists to pay taxes that up until now they do not have to pay. But the way the British Crown and Parliament see it, the war was fought, the French and American War was fought for their benefit. So, it made sense to them to levy taxes against them. And so the first tax to come through 1765 is the Stamp Act, which was really a tax on official documents, not a tax on stamps. Um, but just official documents. And it was not so much the cost associated with this tax that upset the colonists. It was simply the fact that they did not think they should be subject to taxes, because the way it works is, they do not have a direct representation in Parliament. And so, the phrase no taxation without the representation was the cry, and a group known as the Sons of Liberty, um, created, a boycott against certain goods in from Great Britain until they repeal it. Okay. Um, the British government tell the Americans, well, you are already represented in Parliament, so you have no right to say that you are not, although it was indirect representation. So they said that that was not so right. Okay, so moving on, there are other things that the Parliament does to further anger the colonists. One was the Declaratory Act, which says, the subjects of the colonies are, um, under the jurisdiction of Parliament. However, this is interesting. Okay, it says Protestant resistance theory. This is something that I know Dr. Lob-EZ has talked to you on many occasions about, how, Calvinists especially said that you had a right, to resist tyrannical government, and that you, now this is different from the great Martin Luther, who say you don't, but the Calvinists say you do. So they begin to cite Protestant resistance theory as a way, to fight against what they were calling at this time tyranny. Okay. Okay, so something else is known as the Boston Massacre. Okay, so a little. Okay, so in Boston, the anti-British sentiment was at its greatest, and there were many, radicals who wanted to, separate from the Great Britain. And so this was kind of a dangerous place for the British. Well, outside the Boston Customs House, some protesters assembled and began taunting the British soldiers, and they so scared them that they fired into the crowd, killing five. And the way in which it was depicted right here, this was done by Paul Revere. It looks as if it is, in fact, a massacre, although it is less so in reality. But that did not stop the Americans to use this as propaganda against the British, because they had to grow the sentiment, the anti-British sentiment across the colonies, because most people were quite loyal, in fact, to the crown. So this is one of the techniques that they use in events to grow anti-British sentiment. Okay, this is a talk about the Boston Tea Party, which the Sons of Liberty dressed up as Native Americans and dropped a bunch of tea into Boston Harbor because they did not like that the British were forcing them to purchase only British-made goods or British supplied goods, and that they could not purchase things from other countries. So they did not have economic liberty. Okay, and so once they did this, the British responded harshly with what is known as the Coercive or Intolerable Acts, and said that until all of this tea that had been dropped into the harbor was paid for, that the harbor would be shut down and a permanent garrison of troops be placed in Boston. And this is making things very tense, huh? Okay. So this talks about the battles of Lexington and Concord, and the midnight ride of Paul Revere, as the British were trying to arrest and see some of the leaders of the Sons of Liberty, and then also to get at their weapons cache. So this is really, the before war was really declared a battle that more or less solidified the coming break. This book or pamphlet written by Thomas Paine called Common Sense, I think was once mentioned in an earlier unit or chapter, but it helps convince more Americans, what we would call loyalists to the crown, to, break and get on the side of the patriots. Okay. And this painting showed the signing of the very famous Declaration of Independence, uh, 4 July 1776, written by Thomas Jefferson. He talked about the inalienable rights, natural rights, that also John Locke talked about earlier, that are not life, liberty, and property, but Thomas Jefferson changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? And so this is when they, say, we no longer belong to you, England, because you are, uh, tyrannical. Okay. So speeding through a lot of this, but the uh, Americans needed to establish an army, and so they did. They appoint George Washington as its commander, and his responsibility is to build an army, although it is not very successful. Most patriots do not want to serve in the Continental Army. They would rather serve as Minutemen. And although, there was some usefulness in the Revolutionary War from the Minutemen, they lacked the necessary discipline to fight one of the best armies in Europe at the time, that is the British Redcoats. And so they were very unreliable. Although they used the guerrilla warfare tactics that they learned fighting from the Native Americans, they were not reliable. Okay, so as the war wears on, the Americans lack success. Um, you know, Washington gets plenty of credit for uh, his ability to rally his men and make do with very little, and some of his appointments as generals were other generals was very good, but we cannot forget about the assistance that they got from the French. Okay, so the Marquis de Lafayette, who will play an important role in the French Revolution, um, was someone who was that came over to assist the Americans and helped convince his king Louis XVI to support our cause, because the French uh, did not like the British, and so they were willing to support the American cause because it would weaken the hand of the British. Okay, so the final battle that was fought between the Americans and the British and the American Revolution was the Battle of Yorktown, and the Supreme British General Cornwallis was forced to surrender, and in 1781, bringing the war to a close. Okay, so after this, the Treaty of Paris is signed in 1783, and it grants all of this land uh, in this different color of yellow here, um, to America. Okay, and so the colony, or these men, these founding fathers, decided that they needed to draft a constitution very quickly, and they did. It was called the Articles of Confederation. Okay, so confederation means like a loose association of states, or in this instance, the 13 colonies, where there is purposefully no strong centralized government. Okay, and they do that because they want to prevent tyranny, but it is unworkable. This government is too weak because there is no form of taxation. Okay, and so some early crises make it unworkable governmental system. So they have to revise it, and that is the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, where they revise it and write a new constitution. James Madison helps with that, and that is the existing current constitution, which has many safeguards, including Montesquieu's separation of powers, or checks and balances. But furthermore, to create a system of federalism, which is another layer of protection against tyranny. The Bill of Rights is drafted, and this is a further way to reassure those who fear, rightfully so, tyranny, too strong of a centralized government, that these protections would help strengthen or bolster those that were already placed in the Constitution. Okay, so lots of time talking about that. I apologize. So we quickly go through some of the other causes of the French Revolution and the Enlightenment. Okay, and so I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture the liberalism. Okay, and so words like equality, liberty, and the notion of representative government were surely part of it, as was the term popular sovereignty, which means that the true authority to govern or to um, yeah, the right to govern comes from the people, not from the king, not from God. Although that humans get their rights from God, but it is them, in fact, that have the power. Okay, so that idea, along with others, like we see with Montesquieu, we already talk about, and John Locke, we talk about the need to overthrow those governments that abuse the natural rights of its citizens. Okay, so that was influential in helping bring about the French Revolution. Another was something called the Old Regime. Okay, it's not the pronounced regime. Okay, it's the old regime. It was more or less the system of feudalism that kind of was left over from the Middle Ages, although um, most of this was just like cultural. Well, it was written into the tax code too, so I shouldn't say that exactly. But it is a system of privilege that was extended to those people who owned land, and really a denial of certain rights, and this to the masses, to the poor people, and um, there was a lot of benefits in the tax code, which we'll talk about. Okay, so this political cartoon really helps, demonstrate this unfairness. So we see the privileged classes sort of taking a ride on this man who is a peasant, a commoner, and we will give names to these groups right now. Okay, so the first estate comprise one of the privileged classes, and it is the clergy. So it includes all. Priests all the way to the top to like bishops and cardinals. Most of these bishops and cardinals were appointed by the king, so they were mostly nobles already. Okay, so the first estate pay no taxes. Okay, they represent about 1%, and they, as I said, they don't pay taxes. So what do you want? That was, something that made little sense to many people. The second estate include the nobility. They represent about 2%. So the first estate represent one. The second is 2% of the population. This is the nobility. There's a couple of different types of nobles. But these are people who, live a life of leisure and collect lots of rent from the peasantry. Okay, so let's talk about the third estate. The third estate is everybody else, which is about roughly 97% of the population. Well, that's a big group. So the largest group of this third estate was the peasantry, somewhere around 75 to 80% of the population. Okay, I should say that the peasantry really did not take a very active role in much of the revolution. In fact, they turned against it at one point. Okay, but they had resentments against the landowners because of the high rents and the fact that they had to pay for all sorts of things, like using the mill of the landowner. They had to pay to grind their wheat into flour so they could make bread. So that was something that they did not like. The city workers represent about, um, what about 9% of the population. So during the revolution, it is the city workers who make up what they call the mob, and oftentimes they're very angry about the price of bread. And so um, historians look at the when the price of bread spike, so too does the violence and the bloodshed. So that is somewhat interesting. The final group that represent the third estate would be the, how you say, bourgeoisie, okay, not bourgeoisie. Okay, they represent about 8% of the overall population. Now, these are the people who are like middle class. Okay, so they highly educated doctors and lawyers, and these are people also who pay very high, the highest rate of taxes within France, yet they do not have any representation in government. And these are people who believe that they, since they pay such high rates of taxes, that they should have a say in the government. They also are well schooled in Enlightenment thought. So, these are going to be the people who are most behind the leadership behind the revolution. Okay. Another cause is the economic crisis. Okay. So, what is the biggest problem? The biggest problem is debt. DEBT. Debt spells debt. Okay. And due to all of the costly wars of Louis the 14th, and then wars between France and Great Britain, the American Revolution, assistance given to the Americans, creates a good deal of debt. We know that the legacy of Louis the 14th was debt. This is an astronomical percentage. 50% of France's budget went to interest payments alone. Okay. Um, 25% went to fund the military. This is, I look and see, you can see their overall budget for government revenue. Okay, so that's money that comes in through mainly taxation of 472 million livres. And then going out the door with expenditures is 633. Okay, so they upside down, they spend too much money and are unable to, tax the privileged if they could tax them, and probably figure out something to do about the interest payments. They would probably be okay. Okay, so why can't Louis the 16th raise taxes on the first and second estate? Okay, he is, after all, an absolute monarch, or at least he's supposed to be. If we go back to the days of Louis XIV, he replaced the nobility with intendants, or actually, it was Cardinal Richelieu, or as Dr. Lob-EZ called him, Cardinal Ricky. Anyway, they used intendants, right? By the time Louis XIV died, Louis XV, and then later Louis XVI allowed many of those bureaucratic positions to be replaced once again with the nobility. Okay, so that means the courts, especially the parliaments, they are responsible for registering royal decrees, or um, what do you call them? Like executive edicts, executive type orders. So Parliament would refuse to register the king's tax proposals because it would be self-defeating. It would be against their best interests. So they refuse. Okay, so that is why he cannot tax. Also, he is a weak leader. Okay. Many of the holders of French debt are the nobility, and they would not allow him to declare bankruptcy. Okay, so finally, the other source of problems for France's economy is the fact that they lack a central bank. Okay, so one thing that a central bank can do to ease its debt is by printing currency. And since no central bank, no currency, uh, which, by the way, you should know, and you probably already do, that printing currency can create inflation, which is an altogether different type of terrible economic challenge, or it can lead to a crisis. Okay, I think uh, I think that's good. Okay, and so the weak leadership of the king, or just the overall reputation of the royal family, was no good. Okay. Louis the 16th was a man who was disinterested in running his country. His primary focus was hunting. So he allowed, various ministers to govern the state for him while he was at, Versailles going on hunting trips. Okay. And then his wife, who he did not pay too much attention to, she was the princess from Austria, Marie Antoinette. She, um, made up for that by filling her life full of lavish expenditures. And so they both had bad reputations, but she was nicknamed Madame Deficit due to the fact that she lived so lavishly. And then it is reported that she once responded to somebody, at Versailles, saying that there were people at the gate of Versailles complaining about not having any bread to eat, and her response was supposedly, "Let them eat cake," which, underscores the fact that she is out of touch. But historians say she did not say that, so I don't know. Okay, look at Louis. All right. Yes, I already discussed this. He was not a strong leader, and so that was another issue. Yet another cause of the French Revolution is the calling of the Estates General. Okay, what is this? The Estates General is the old legislative body that existed in France, which was called um, whenever there was a particular need to get the consensus of the people behind a specific, decision that needed to be made. So if they needed consensus, um, they called the Estates General. Well, uh, because of Louis XIV not wanting, and even before, not wanting to share power with the nobility, the Estates General was never called, and it is the king's responsibility to do just that. Um, so the king's finance minister, whose name was Charles de Calonne, um, had a proposal in which the first and second estate would pay taxes on their property. To convince them of this, he was able to establish a meeting with a small group known as the Assembly of Notables. And when he floated this idea to them, they responded that, okay, fine, but we get to control the expenditures of the king. Louis, of course, refused this idea because it would, be a limit on his power. So they in turn said that no such a proposal for increased taxation could be considered unless the Estates General was called into session. So that is what Louis did because the debt was mounting, okay, and the unrest of the people was mounting. France, on top of all of these problems, had crop failures that led bread prices to soar drastically. So there was, a unrest, and the king does not want this to boil over, and so he wisely calls the estates general. Okay, so each estate is allowed, a certain number of delegates or representatives. And in anticipation of in the summer of 1789, the Estates General, each estate began drafting, a list of reforms that would fix the problem. Of course, the third estate, their delegates and their concerns were primarily the need to tax the first and second estate. Okay, please remember once again that the third estate represents 97% of the population. Okay, so as they were meeting, the I guess the way in which the proceedings would take place, like certain rules needed to be established. Okay, and so how were each estate going to vote? Um, and how would the final decisions be made? Okay, so would the estates vote by head or would they vote by order? Voting by head meant that every deputy would receive a vote. And since the third estate had the most deputies, then they would dominate the proceedings. However, if they decided to, the king that is, vote by order, then each estate would only receive one vote. So, as you can see, this scenario is not good because ostensibly the first and second estate that together only comprise 3% of the population could outvote the third representing 97%. The king decided that in fact they would vote by order as opposed to head. And this was enough to lead the third estate to abandon the estate's general meetings and decide to break off and form their own assembly. Okay, and so that seems to be the final straw and the event that triggers the French Revolution. Okay, so that is all for today. The next video will discuss the moderate phase of the revolution. Okay, so va bene, that is all for me and for today. You are all very good. I will tell Dr. Lob-EZ that you all paid very close attention and gave Donado no problems whatsoever. Okay, ciao. Have a good night. Bye bye.